Welcome to the Blue Security Podcast, a weekly podcast for information security defenders, where we bring you discussions on best practices, tools, and implementation for enterprise security. Now, here are your hosts for today's show, Andy Jha and Adam Brewer.
Welcome to this week's episode of the Blue Security Podcast. I'm Andy, your host.
I'm Adam, your co-host.
We are officially over the milestone for 4 years of this podcast, and it has been such a fun and rewarding experience. Adam, during the pandemic, we had talked about starting a podcast, and we had even talked about starting a podcast before the pandemic. And then I think during the pandemic, we were like, well, there's nothing else to do. Let's just start one. My initial goal was really because there's so many different podcasts out there that people can listen to. I wanted to give people actionable things because that's what I found useful when I would go to different conferences and I would listen to someone speak and there was something actionable that they talked about that I could go back to my environment and take a look at or implement or check or whatever. And so that's what I really envisioned the podcast to be, but we have mixed some news in there and given our spin on different things. But overall, I have been so thankful for you and our audience that they've stuck with this. And we have released, now this will be the 210th episode without ever missing a single week for 4 years.
I missed 1 or 2 weeks once upon a time early on when we were kind of getting our sea legs and still learning our cadence and how we were going to go about this. But yeah, I mean, is what I always tell people I'm most proud of is the consistency of the show. And that does require a lot of planning, especially around the holidays and like the end of the year. We'll start recording midweek. We'll record 2-3 episodes a week. We get multiple weeks ahead sometimes just because we don't have time to get together on a weekly basis with us traveling and seeing family. And that's all labor of love. That's already a busy time of year, but our commitment to our viewers and our listeners is that we'll be here week in and week out for you, bringing something hopefully interesting or educational. And so, like Andy said, really, this is all about you all who listen or view the show on a weekly basis. We have steadily grown our audience over time, and it's been a steady growth curve upward. And it's been really fun and really enjoyable to watch. And truly, when we say labor of love, we mean it. We've made no effort to monetize the show. We spent a lot of money kind of getting it going in the early years. We both deeply care that it sounds good. So we bought nice microphones and interfaces and pay money for a service, Riverside FM, which we love, to help us record the show. We spend our own money to put this show on. We're not getting anything financially in return, but we do get the opportunity to speak to you all and really the responsibility to learn and be educated in what we talk about. And that kind of brings me to a point I wanted to make here. As long as we're reminiscing on 4 years, they say it's easiest to teach what you know and to share what you know with others. And certainly, as I made the point that Andy and I have invested our own personal funding into the show, we both do work for Microsoft today, which wasn't the case when we started, actually. Andy, you were still at a previous employer, and then you came back to Microsoft, and then we worked together for a while, and then I took a different role a year ago. We haven't actually worked together for the last year plus now, but sometimes folks listening to the show say, man, there seems to be a Microsoft heavy focus in the show. Or we've even received a comment in the past about how one of our shows sounds like an ad or like a pitch. And I want to talk about that for just a second. So my background, I graduated from college during the financial crisis, got out into the real world, IT, various jobs in IT. I never dreamed that I would go into quote unquote sales. And so as an IT professional, when I got recruited to come to Microsoft and start as a technical seller, one of the things I always promised to myself is that I would be true to myself. I would be true to the technology, and I would be radically transparent, and would make sure there was good customer product fit in anything I did. I'm not selling anybody anything they can't use or would be shelfware. doesn't integrate with their existing solutions. And I take that very seriously. And as I discovered as I was at Microsoft, almost everyone there that I've interacted with operates with the highest integrity in that sense. We're not out just wanting to land software that sits on people's shelves. We want to make sure it's something you can use. And in fact, today at Microsoft, a lot of our field sales team are actually compensated on making sure customers are fully using everything they pay for. It's good for business and it's good for our customers. But where I'm going with all of this, and one thing I learned very early on from the person who offered me the job was, we want you to come here because you have a passion for educating people on technology. You have a passion for sharing it. Before I came to Microsoft, I did a series of lunch and learns every month at my company where I got the chance to be excited and kind of do what I'm doing now, but in front of a live audience and talk about a technology and make it simple and easy to understand. And I see our role here, Andy, like you mentioned, not only giving actionable guidance, but to educate. We are here to educate. Education is not a bad thing. Education is a good thing. If you are learning about what's available in the marketplace, what other products do, how other vendors approach things, even if you don't use that vendor or that product, it helps you understand what the landscape looks like. It helps you evaluate your current tool set. It helps you think about what your future state architecture looks like. Education will never hurt you. And so learning about something may sound like a pitch sometimes because, Andy, I know you are, and I am too. We're optimists. We believe in the power of technology. We believe in the good technology can bring to people. And when we talk about stuff, we get excited about it because I don't want to sit here and tear something down. Sure as heck not going to tear something down from my employer, which is why we give a disclaimer on almost every show. But I'm going to present the positives. Here's what this does well. Here's how this can help you. Here's the good in this. That's not a sales pitch. That's education. And that is positively focused education on what are the benefits. Obviously, I encourage everyone to do a pilot, to do a proof of concept on any new technology you're looking at, and do a full analysis, pros and cons, good and bad. And that's up to you. But certainly, when we talk on this show, we're going to talk about the positives. We're going to look at how we make things better. We're going to talk about how we make the lives of security defenders better and help you secure your organizations and how we make your day-to-day work better. That's what we're here to do. So if it comes off like a sales pitch sometimes, I can understand that because I, by my nature, am optimistic and I like to talk about all the good things stuff does. We will continue to be very upfront and transparent about our day jobs. And we'll continue to mention that our day job doesn't impact this job. I'm recording this on a Sunday morning at 9 a.m. I'm not doing this during my 9 to 5. I'm doing this outside of work because I love it. And Andy loves it. We're taking time away from our families to do it. So on that note, you will hear us talk about Microsoft a lot in the future on today's show. Because it's what we know so well. And we're sharing the education we get from talking to so many different customers across the Fortune 500, across industries, across geographies, what is working well for them, what's not working well for them, what we hear and see from them, and bringing that perspective, not just at one organization, but at hundreds between Andy and I think that's our superpower, being able to take what we see and say, here's what orgs are doing really well. And here's where orgs have more work to do. That's what I love bringing to this show. And that's why I really love sharing with you all. So thank you for being with us on the journey. Thank you for watching and listening. And we hope this is something you continue to tune into week in and week out. Thank you so much for your support.
Yeah, I just want to echo a couple of points there. One of the things that I think drove us to start a podcast is that we get to talk to these customers. And it felt like to me, I kept on having the same conversations and people didn't know about things. Mm-hmm. For example, when I got to Microsoft the first time around back in 2018, I learned about all the different things that Windows Enterprise Security has to offer. Things like Application Guard and Credential Guard and all those other different guards that were there that I didn't know about. And so I kept on having these conversations and I realized that people didn't know about it. So the benefit of having this podcast and telling people is that we get to reach a larger audience, and it's recorded in, one time, and you can go back and watch it. And the technology for some of that stuff hasn't changed. So it's still relevant today, even though we've recorded it 3-4 years ago. And same thing, as Adam said, in technical sales, I operate under I never will sell something that you don't need. I won't tell you about something that you don't need. And in fact, I got into a pretty heated argument with one of my coworkers because they were like, "We're salespeople. You should sell them this." And I'm like, "No, like clearly their requirements didn't state that they needed this. So I'm not going to try to shoehorn something in because it's obvious that this won't solve their issue." And so, we're just here to educate, and a lot of things that Microsoft offers, a lot of people just don't know about. And so if it helps you and you want to use it, great. If you knew about it and you don't want to use it, or you just found out about it and it still doesn't fit your needs, great. Let's move on, right? So we're just trying to tell you about a lot of the things that we hear about on our jobs and you might not get to because you're busy with the day-to-day of operations in your company.
So well said. And not to toot our own horn here, but again, going back to, of course, at every organization, there's going to be people with different outlooks on integrity and the rules and how we should go about doing our jobs. And again, I'm not tooting our own horn, but Andy and I both do very well at Microsoft in terms of like recognition and performance reviews and that sort of thing. We both have had a lot of success, which proves that you can go in with that mindset of, I'm going to operate with the highest integrity. I'm going to ensure there's product customer fit. I'm not going to push something, shoehorn something into a place where it doesn't belong. And you can still be very successful with that mindset. And so that's something Andy and I take to our day jobs, but we take seriously on our night job as well. This show is, again, we're here to educate. Not everything's a great fit for you, but knowledge is always power.
All right, so let's talk about some news.
Let's do it.
This took me by surprise because I hadn't heard an initial announcement, so I was kind of just looking at stuff for the show today, and this popped up. So Microsoft has officially announced that Windows Server Update Services, commonly known as WSUS, is now deprecated, and plans to maintain current functionality are still there. So Adam and I were talking before the show, and we talked about how a lot of customers that we talk to, when they hear something is deprecated, they're immediately like, "Oh my God, I have to stop using it." That is not the case. WSUS is still supported. A lot of times when Microsoft says something is deprecated, they really mean that they're taking teams off to not continue to add new features to it. So there's going to be no changes, no new things, but it's still supported. You can still continue to use it. If there's an issue or a bug, it will still be patched. But we're trying to really move people from WSUS to more modern ways of patching, like Windows Autopatch or Microsoft Intune or Azure Update Manager, which actually is something new to me. I was trying to, just a few years ago, I had a demo tenant and I was looking at Azure Automation and Azure Arc in order to update all of my VMs because I had several VMs running and I would have to log in. Either way, at a large organization, you want to automate this. But even for me, I had like maybe 5 VMs and I wasn't automating it. I would log in and have to manually patch each one. So I said, there must be a better way. So I was using Azure Automation. There was update built into that, but that has now also been deprecated and moved over to this new thing called Azure Update Manager, which I just found out about this week because I was trying to do the same thing in my new demo tenant. And I went down to where the old update part used to be in Azure Automation, and it's not there anymore. And so now it moves me over to Azure Update Manager, which I was looking at, and I'm like, this is a really nice fleshed out solution. Automatically update all of your VMs, whether they're Azure Arc enabled, meaning they might not live in Azure, they might be in AWS or on-prem in my case, because I host a server here in my house and I've onboarded those with Azure Arc, or if they're Azure hosted and they're in Azure, you can use this update manager to automate all of your patches with a specific maintenance window and downtime repeated, monthly or however you want to do it. So I found it to be really cool. If you use Azure or you are looking at it, this is a great way to automate all of your updates.
This was surprising to me too. When we were talking before the show, I was looking at the show notes. I was like, whoa, WSUS is deprecated? This is wild. And he made a great point. Deprecation does not equal out of support. Those are two different concepts. This announcement was very adamant that WSUS remains operational. However, we are no longer investing in new features, and we will continue to maintain current functionality and continue to publish updates through the channel. So you can keep using WSUS for now. Deprecation does mean, in addition, that it's no longer under active new feature development. Although I jokingly said before the show, I thought that had already happened too. I didn't know WSUS had gotten new features in a long time. It does mean eventually, yes, a sunset is approaching. It doesn't mean it's been announced. It doesn't mean it's happening anytime soon, but it should at least plant the seed in everyone's mind that WSUS is not going to be around forever. And so what's next? And I will say, not to pick on folks in device management who have a very difficult job, but those teams have tended to be, in my mind, and I realize I'm painting with a broad brush, the most resistant to change and modernization of practically anyone in modern enterprise IT. Apologies for painting with a broad brush. That's my overall perspective. Again, from speaking with many customers, I still see a ton of hybrid join, on-premises domain join, SCCM management for everything, WSUS for patching. We're evaluating all patches ourselves. We don't have clearly defined deployment rings or deployment schedules for patching, so on and so forth. And so this is a great opportunity with this announcement. Not that you need to change tomorrow, not that you need to go jump off a cliff, but it is time to look at Windows Update for Business. It is time to look at a minimum, co-management with Microsoft Intune. It is now time to look at Windows Autopatch and find the right fit for your organization. But this is not a forever thing. Now, again, you don't have to do anything tomorrow, but it's time to start planning, and it's time to commit to modernizing device management approach. A lot of these technologies now have been in market for 7-8 years. I've been talking about a lot of this stuff literally since I joined Microsoft 7.5 years ago. So there are mature solutions, maybe not 20 years old mature, but still plenty mature. And if they're missing a critical feature you must have, that is a modern forward-looking feature, put in the feature request. Let us know where Autopatch falls short. Let us know where Windows Update for Business falls short. Now, to be clear, those are not going to support a model where you download every patch individually and you evaluate them all independently and you are doing a go, no-go decision on every single patch Tuesday. That's not the model. The model is Patch Tuesday happens. Same day, you may have a small team in IT that gets those patches. The following day, you may have a slightly larger team in IT get them. Wait 3 more days if no screaming. Send it to your super users early the following week. If your super users don't scream, send it to half your org 1 week post Patch Tuesday. If no screaming, then another 3 days, send it to the rest of the org. Are you listening, CrowdStrike, by the way, on this is how you do it? Then you've patched and you didn't have to spend a lot of human effort doing that. This is the kind of model that every organization needs to adopt moving forward. Safe deployment, but phased deployment, scheduled rollout deployments of patching. Patching needs to happen efficiently and should not be a human involved process unless and only something goes wrong. And then when something goes wrong, pull it back. And this is the great thing with Windows Autopatch. And we had, loved his name, by the way, from the product group for Windows Autopatch on this show. Boy, Andy, was that almost 1.5 years ago now, talking about it. And one of the things he talked about with Windows Autopatch is because it's able to get telemetry across so many different customers, you essentially get a broader view than just your company if there is something wrong with the patch. So let's say a patch goes out and all of a sudden Windows Autopatch is getting telemetry that a lot of machines are choking on this patch. They can pause it automatically, maybe before you as a human would have even known, because you were still sleeping, or it was the weekend and Australia got the patch first and they found the error before anybody else did, or whatever the case may be. So there's a lot of good in here. There's a lot of ways to modernize. And I would take this mindset and run with it across your entire device management stack. There's no better time. And I know on the Blue Security podcast, we have kicked that poor dead horse for a long time, but we need to modernize our device management practices. And this should be another gentle little shove in that direction. Even if you don't have to get off WSUS tomorrow, now at least this should plant the seed that, well, we should start thinking about it, and not just thinking about it, but planning for it.
Yeah. And the other thing too, the update specifically called out that home users are not going to be affected by this change, obviously. And then those who are using SCCM are also not going to be affected if they're just using SCCM. So it's really only those who are relying solely on WSUS. And again, when we say affected, there's just going to be no new features. The functionality and everything are still going to work. We haven't announced a end of life for WSUS. So this is not that announcement, but as Adam said, it's probably on the chopping block at some point in the future. So it's probably a good time to take a look if you are just using WSUS to try to modernize onto something else. Okay. The final thing I want to talk about is macOS. So last week, Apple had its annual,
OS release day.
yeah, was it last week that they had their announcements and everything?
So Monday, so 6 days ago as we record this, will be 8 days by the time you hear this, was the day Apple released all their new OSs: iOS 18, macOS 15, tvOS, iPadOS, watchOS. They drop them all in one day, which, Andy, if you remember, they used to release those day and date with the new phone, which was just like hilariously dumb. And I'm so glad we're past that, where they release a new phone. You've got the new phone killing the activation servers at AT&T. Then they drop a new OS update, and all the existing devices plus the new devices are all trying to patch all on that same day. And it's like, could you spread it out a little bit? Like, we don't need to do this all at once.
Yeah, and I was really looking forward to it because selfishly, Microsoft has moved to passkeys. Adam and I have talked about this. They rolled it out like just with no warning. We just got a message in, probably Teams when we're checking it on our phone that said, hey, you need to like enroll in passkeys. And the Microsoft Authenticator, which is installed on devices, would have to register a passkey for each one. So my iPad is Intune joined, so I had to register a passkey for that one. My iPhone is Intune joined. And so as part of that, whenever you signed in, it would periodically check to make sure that you have a passkey. And you had to enable in the settings for iOS the Authenticator as a password manager. And previously in iOS 17, you could only have one password manager autofill things. And of course, if you've been following the show, you know that Adam and I are huge fans of 1Password. We've been using that for a while. So, or whatever password manager you might have, Bitwarden or something else. If you had that set as your autofill, you had to disable that and then check the Authenticator, which is what I had to do, which meant that my personal passwords wouldn't autofill. I have to manually check like a heathen in the app itself and then copy and paste it over. So now with iOS 18, you do have options of multiple password managers. So I updated right away. I also use an Intune joined MacBook Pro. And just like most security professionals, you generally try to update as soon as the update comes out. That is the case for security patches in general. But this is what we would call a feature update for the most part, going from macOS 14 to macOS 15. And as I did that, I experienced a lot of the issues that a lot of users and organizations have reported having this week. There have been network connectivity issues. An official announcement from Microsoft in one of our documents that talks about how Apple has changed the way that their network stack works in the new operating system. And so there are issues with Defender for Endpoint, and other people who have been using other security products like CrowdStrike or ESET have also noticed that there have been connectivity issues or crashes, packet corruptions leading to SSL failures in the web browsers, inability to use like NuGet or curl within the shell. And so the guidance right now, if you haven't seen it, is do not upgrade. So if you're an enterprise user and you're using enterprise security software, do not upgrade to the Mac operating system until they get a handle on this. And really, I think the most disappointing thing for me, I saw several tweets that said users who were using this in preview reported these issues to Apple. So they knew that these network issues were happening and they released the software, the update with these bugs still in it. So that to me is extremely disappointing because it really impacts a large portion of their users being enterprise users who need VPN, who need security software installed. And, obviously as a regular user, you may not have that. So probably not a big deal. But as an enterprise user, this was my daily driver and I had to stop using it. I ended up switching to an Azure virtual desktop to complete most of my work this week. And I don't know when they're going to patch this issue. So I'm in a holding pattern as well as a lot of people who did upgrade. So if you haven't upgraded yet, don't do it.
This, by the way, I'm recording on a Mac right now. I'm on a Mac Mini running macOS 15. Mine is no longer enterprise joined. I stopped doing it just because I wasn't using it enough. And there's a long story why, but I'll save that for another time. So I haven't experienced this. However, it is disappointing because I know Apple, and I just talked about this, loves to do these big release days where everything comes out at once. However, Apple in the very recent history has not always released the macOS update day and date with all the iOS derivatives day and date, because like tvOS, watchOS, those are all iOS derivatives. macOS is kind of its own thing at this point. They used to do all the iOS stuff in September, and then the macOS update shipped a month later. So to even add more disappointment to it, even though Apple loves the optics of how this looks, of we release everything all in one day, they have done a macOS release date a month later many times recently. And so if there was what I would consider to be a blocking bug here, there's no reason they couldn't have held it back. And that's disappointing. I think it undermines Apple's storytelling as an enterprise vendor. You could make the argument that, well, serious enterprises won't, run brand new software day and date anyway. And that's fair. However, many organizations manage their macOS devices differently than their PCs intentionally. Part of the reason like executives love to run their Macs and stuff, I think is, although Macs are great, and I think they make some of the best laptops in the world, they sometimes love them because enterprise IT doesn't have all of the infrastructure built up to make the managed experience horrible. So they're usually lightly managed at most, and they deliver a better experience because they're not running 9 billion agents and DLP agents and so on and so forth. Those people are the ones who did the upgrade anyway. They're enthusiasts, they're excited, they're going to, there's a new update, I'm going to go get it right away. Ironically, the organizations that do heavier handed enterprise style management, more Windows-like management of their Mac OS devices as well, they almost certainly did not take this update yet. They did hold back. They did not allow their users to take it. Because keep in mind, Apple used to, especially on iOS, only ship security updates with new feature updates. You had to take the new features to get the security updates as well. That's no longer the case. Apple does ship security updates for iOS -1. And in fact, there was an iOS 17.7 that dropped last Monday. And macOS, they've long supported -2. So macOS 13 and 14 will continue to receive security patching for the next year. So even if you can't run macOS 15, you still get security patches. So you don't need to install this to stay secure, is the long-winded description I just gave. In general, this, again, impacts enthusiasts who are trying to use their Macs to conduct work more than anything. I think that's harmful to Apple's efforts of expanding in the enterprise, and that's disappointing. I will say the one other thing too, and this is my guidance always in cybersecurity, is never sit in your glass house and throw stones. There were a lot of folks in the Mac community who cackled with glee at the CrowdStrike incident on Windows and talked about how on macOS, they restrict what endpoint security platforms can do. They have to run in this special mode. They have APIs to get what they need. And so they can't take down the whole system. And Apple has it all figured out. And, Microsoft's engineers are a bunch of chumps, which ignores the whole history that Microsoft tried to do that back in the Windows Vista days. And there were regulatory issues and the European Union got involved. That's way above my pay grade as far as why Windows has less protection for endpoint security platforms today. By the way, tangent, Microsoft did host an endpoint security summit at our Redmond headquarters either this last week or 2 weeks ago. And we issued a press release coming out of it, maybe more of a blog, from our head of platform security, David Weston. And he was talking through kind of the conversation that had happened. And there were some pull quotes from other vendors. And I think it was ESET, Andy, who walked out of there and made some sort of comment like, yeah, it was a good summit, but we're committed that we must have kernel access and unfettered kernel access until the end of time. And we will not accept any restrictions to that. It's like, bro, did you not pay attention to anything that had just happened? So again, like, it's more complicated than just like Apple's engineers are great and Microsoft's are lame. It's a much bigger story than that involves regulators and other things as well. But getting back to my point, a lot of folks in the Mac side of the house were very gleeful at that incident occurring and talking about how great the Mac was and how superior the engineering was. And now this happens where endpoint security platforms are kind of running in a suboptimal state. Shout out to our buddy Josh Gingras for that, in that the network access is inconsistent. And so here is things like they always do coming full circle. So never, ever, ever sit there and take glee in someone else's outage or someone else's incident or anything else. As I am fond of saying, karma is undefeated, and especially in this industry. And if you are on the good side of one thing, you'll be on the bad side of the next one. So stay humble and stay patient. And we're all doing the best we can here. And so my shout out to my friends over on the Mac management side of the world, the Mac admins of the world. Probably a little bit of a rough week and maybe coming weeks for you as this undermines some confidence in your platform as an enterprise solution. This too shall pass. Apple will issue an update here probably within the next week or two. They'll fix it. And this will become a distant memory before we know it. But it is a good reminder, of course. And as great as Apple's secure software quality is, keep in mind, generally not a great idea to update on day one to some of these new updates if you need it for critical work. Always have a backup plan if you do. And Andy, I'm glad you had an opportunity to use Azure Virtual Desktop to be able to keep doing your work. Not everyone has that option, but good on you for having a backup plan and executing.
It's always crazy to me when I talk to our coworkers. I know we've kind of joked about this, but I have multiple devices that I can move to. Of course, have my issued Surface Book 3, which is like my backup to my backup because I really don't like using it. And I have other devices, but this Azure Virtual Desktop has been a great addition to the variety. And if you haven't used it before, it's outstanding in its experience from a user aspect. I've used it for team meetings. I've used it for just work in general. And the pass-through, I've used it on my personal computer, which we do require a FIDO2 security key to authenticate every single time. So there is a lot of security around it, but it doesn't require my personal PC to be joined to Intune, just multi-factor with a phish-resistant method. And then I'm in and I'm passing through my great audio from this podcast, right? Because it's this setup. And so I have this setup with the camera, using it for Teams meetings. And there is no lag, there is no latency, and I've been just really happy with the experience overall. The only thing that I actually struggled with this week was I had a customer schedule a meeting with me using Zoom, and then I couldn't download because Microsoft restricts what we can install, and so Zoom was actually restricted to be installed on the Azure Virtual Desktop. So I did have to switch to Mac, and luckily everything was fine there. But yeah, take a look because it is a great light way to onboard users. We haven't done a virtualization show in a while, so maybe we'll revisit that in the future. But virtualization, great way to fill in if you need something in a pinch. We also have, Windows 365, and both solutions are great for remote workers.
Yeah, it's a great call out. And you made me think of a broader point too, just in terms of resilience. And I think a lot of what we do as cybersecurity professionals is we're actually trying to build resilience into the business that the business can stay running. Now, we're trying to build resilience from an aspect of like cyber attacks, and we're going to prevent them so the business keeps up and running instead of them taking things down. But since that's something that's so familiar to us, we can extend our skill set maybe beyond our immediate circle of influence and talk to some of our peers around how they're building resilience into their platforms. I think not that you should issue every employee like multiple PCs or anything like that, but having some sort of resilient access model so that if that PC is unavailable, you have a way for that person to continue to work other than we will overnight you another laptop tomorrow and someone has to run to the bench and image a device all of a sudden. And what if that were just grab one off the shelf and throw it in the mail because you have Autopilot stood up and all modern management, and they can just sign in with their creds and go. You don't have to re-image it. You don't have to put the gold image on there or any of that. So there's lots of ways you can build resilience with Azure Virtual Desktop and Windows 365, just two options. There's other ones out there, of course, but really, really great point. And I know, Andy, yeah, I agree. As kind of, we have multiple devices managed. We have multiple ones we could pull out at any given time. Like it would be really hard to knock me offline. At this point, I will say the one thing we had here recently, total, side note, is our CenturyLink building, like downtown Des Moines, flooded. And a lot of folks rely on CenturyLink for their backbone connectivity to the internet. I did not know this, but CenturyLink, or I guess they're called Lumen nowadays, is the single largest internet backbone provider. I did not know that, but if you go look it up on Wikipedia, it says it's true, so it must be. And it took down like the cell towers. It took down like I have fiber internet through them. And so I'm trying to use like T-Mobile 5G, and it's like they must have had to fall back to some sort of backup connectivity on the tower. And so my whole plan is, well, T-Mobile's my backup. Didn't work out so well with that kind of failed too. So it was as much as resilience as I thought I had between having, two different connections and having multiple PCs and having the cloud PC options. Like, sometimes you could do all the planning in the world and you can only go so far. Sometimes it's still just beyond your control, but doesn't mean you shouldn't try, right? And there's plenty of times when, hey, if my ISP had gone down, I did have a fallback. And I know you do the same thing. You have a T-Mobile connectivity for your backup as well.
I also have Starlink for my camper van, so I have
See,
that
if I had
as well.
Starlink, I would have been all set.
Yeah. And I got their new Starlink Mini, which is, again, this is tangent side note if people are still listening here. But yeah, I got their new Starlink Mini satellite, and that thing can fit into a backpack and run off of a battery. And so it's super nice.
That stuff still just seems like voodoo with the speed and connectivity of it. And it is amazing how like there were entrenched players in that space who you kind of thought knew what they were doing, like in HughesNet and stuff. Hughes actually used to be the parent company of DirecTV. So like certainly had experience like running a major like consumer facing satellite service. And they have like really wimpy speeds and horrible latency. And it's like, man, if you have no other option, you live in the middle of nowhere, well, then I guess you can get that. And then Starlink comes out and just beats the pants off them. Like in terms of, and I'm no Elon fan, to say the least, but my goodness, it's amazing how you have entrenched player with smart people that's capable of great engineering work and very difficult work when you're talking about satellites and space and launches and all of this, and just beats the pants off them. The technology they created is really incredible. And obviously the Starlink constellation is a lot of what makes that possible when they're in a lower Earth orbit. And so you have less latency and just shorter line of sight to any given satellite, but still incredible engineering work. Really, really brilliant. And it sounds like voodoo every time I hear it, but it's real. It's real and it's spectacular. There it is.
It is pretty crazy because the speeds that you get are very similar to what you would get on a normal internet, a high internet speed connection. And I remember when I was deployed in Afghanistan, I used some third-party satellite provider that was contracted out, and I was paying something like, at that time, I want to say $150 a month to this company to get 128K down and like 4K up. And so that was my connection back then. And now, at the same price, essentially for Starlink, you're getting a high-speed internet.
Hundreds of megabits. It's incredible.
Yeah.
Cool.
All right. Well, that's our show for this week. Thanks for watching and listening. As always, our contact information is in the show notes. If you have any questions or topics you want us to talk about in the future, please reach out to us. Thanks for sticking with us for 4 years. Hopefully we'll be around for a lot longer than that.
Love it.
All right.
Let's keep it rolling, man.
Yep. We'll talk to you guys next week.
Thank you for listening to the Blue Security Podcast. Please check out the show notes, catch up on episodes you may have missed, and subscribe so you don't miss any future episodes. Find Andy on Twitter @AJaw0 and Adam @AJ Brewer. See you at our next episode.